All right. Welcome back to More Up North. Welcome back. Thank you. God, you're sounding so sincere. It's fabulous, really. It's not like there's even a sign. Welcome back to More Up North. I'm Shannyn Moore, and I'm so happy that this week half of our legislature decided to go on a junket. Junket sluts. They did. They all decided to go to D.C. Half of them did, and a couple of others came home to do some work, and one of those was Senator Bill Wielechowski. I know, amazing. He's just started his second term in the Alaska Senate representing the East Side, and I call him the best Bill in Juneau, and I'm pretty sure I'm right. Say hello to my very good friend, and Alaska's really good friend, actually, Senator Bill Wielechowski. So normally what we do on this show is we have an interview and then we have like 3 people on a panel and we try to find people that don't agree with each other, which isn't really that hard in this state. But tonight we're just going to have Bill here for an hour because he has been sort of the David to the Goliath right now of Sean Parnell's bill trying to roll back ACES. And so we've got lots of questions for him and he's got lots and lots of paperwork basically coming from Sean Parnell, if I'm not mistaken. So Senator Wielechowski, this gets really wonky really fast.
Yes, it does.
We had something called ELF, which should have had a little red hat. And then we had the PPT, which people know about because of the Corrupt Bastards Club. And now we've got ACES because Sarah Palin thought that was a clever name. Can you sort of, just for people that just fell off the turnip truck, how did we get to where we're at now? How did it all start?
It's a great question because if you don't understand the past, you are destined to commit your mistakes of your past, right? And that is what we're about to do here if we pass the governor's bill. Back in 1988, 89, the legislature worked on a bill called the ELF, the Economic Limit Factor. And what that bill did was a number of things. It set a tax rate of 15% of the gross profits for the fields on the North Slope. Now, what it also did was the oil companies were able to negotiate a provision into the bill where it lowered the tax rate. As these fields become, quote, marginal fields, as they become challenged fields, as they start to use up all the oil that's in the fields, then we will lower the tax rates on those fields because that will spur investment, right? Everyone, you hear it all the time on the radio, you hear it all the time on TV, lower taxes spurs more investment, right? Isn't that true? Everyone believes that, right? Well, what happened in Alaska? We actually have 20 years of history, actually 25 years of history on this exact issue. And what we found was it didn't do that. We lowered the tax rates down to 0% on 15 out of the 19 fields on the North Slope. And we'll show some slides and we'll actually show you what the impacts were. So that was ELF. Now, we realized this was a big mistake back in around 2005, 2006. And so actually it was Representative Lesguerre and Senator Hollis French who were the pioneers. They said, you know what, we need to do something about this. They filed legislation to increase and to try to get Alaska's fair share for our oil taxes.
So was that under Frank then? That was the PPT
right.
That ended up to be
Well, what happened was they filed their bills and nothing happened. They didn't even get a hearing, right? So then Governor Wielechowski is the governor, and he says, we got to do something here. The legislature realizes we're getting very little in oil revenue, so we need to change something. So actually, Governor Wielechowski went ahead and filed this bill called PPT, Petroleum Profits Tax. And this was the tax where Governor Wielechowski, if you remember, came out and said, the tax rate is going to be 25%, and we're going to have progressivity. And then he literally went away for a weekend, met with a bunch of oil company executives, came back and said, I changed my mind, it's going to be 20%. And so there was a big battle over what the actual percentage rate should be.
And wasn't PPT really like pending prison time? Isn't that really what it stood for?
Well, PPT, I mean, PPT ended up, a number of legislators actually ended up going to jail over PPT. That's the one where roughly 10% of the legislature was indicted over PPT. So yeah, there was some concern over that. I know there were a lot of honest legislators that worked on that bill and did what they believed was honest and genuine. But there were definitely some, like the chairman of the Oil and Gas Committee in the House, Vic Horan, who's in jail right now because traded this vote to kill the bill.
Well, I think that Alaskans were watching all the corruption trials. Just not everyone was paying attention like I was on the front row with popcorn, really. But I think what bothered me more than the corruptness was the cheapness. I found it amazing that our legislators would go so cheap. Because we are talking about billions of dollars. We're talking about how many cents on the dollar Alaska relies on oil revenues?
It's roughly 87 to 90% of all revenue to the state is oil.
Right, so if it's that much money, you should at least get more than a, Honda.
Yeah. Actually, there were cheeseburgers involved. So it was very low in some cases. But anyway, 2006 happened, and we all remember what happened in 2006. So we had a governor, I can't remember what her name was. She's been in the press somewhere. But we elected a new governor, and we actually, on the Senate side, elected a 10-10 Senate. We had a Democratic majority, actually a Democratic bipartisan majority on the Senate for the first time in 2 decades. And so the governor introduced her bill called ACES, and that bill went through a series of modifications. We actually increased the amount fairly significantly from what the governor originally proposed, but we ended up with what we believe is our fair share for our resource on the North Slope. And Governor Palin was totally behind this bill. It was a bipartisan piece of work, Republicans, Democrats, very conservative Republicans, very liberal Democrats, getting together to push this through and finally help Alaska get our fair share.
I find it interesting that I've spent a lot of time, you're spending a majority of your time right now, fighting for something that a lot of people like to call Sarah Palin's crown jewel of her legislation. Yeah. Just in case there's been any confusion, I don't really like her. But I will fight tooth and nail for this legislation that she calls her crown jewel and that she signed because it was really good for Alaska. And if people can't back off from the fact that she was attached to it.
Well, not only, it was Sarah Palin's crown jewel. Not only was it her crown jewel, but it was also her what's the guy who's second in charge? The lieutenant governor. It was the lieutenant governor crown jewel as well. He was a big supporter of this bill, Governor Parnell. And so it's been interesting to see the transformation of his position anyway in the last few years. And so if you go, I'll show you some of the slides of the impacts that this bill has had on Alaska. It's just been phenomenal. If you look in the 4 years since ACES has passed, this bill has generated $11 billion more than the old ELF bill would have generated. And now, when we were looking at this bill, there was a lot of people saying, well, you shouldn't pass this because government's just going to spend it. You're all just going to go out and spend it. But the interesting thing is we actually managed to take all this money and put it into savings because we realized someday we're going to run out of oil. And what we actually did, we took $11 billion, we put it into savings. We've earned some money on top of that. So our savings account is now roughly $12 billion. We've actually saved virtually every penny more than we've generated from that. We've also taken some of the money and we've put it towards capital projects, roads, bridges, education, public safety. All the things that are important to us as Alaskans, we've put that money towards to really improve the quality of life here in Alaska. And Alaska really helped, we skirted the serious recession that you had in the lower 48 because we had this cushion of money out there that we could spend on projects and keep our economy going. So we have the largest savings account in the United States because of this bill that we passed. And it's expected that we'll grow to about $14 billion after this year because of the interest that we're going to earn on it.
I think it's really important to make a distinction between us and some of the other states. To pull out the Wally Hickle, we're an owner state, and how that makes us different. This is a resource that's sitting in a bank account that's used to hire, construction companies, to hire nurses, to hire teachers, create jobs, help our society go. But it's from a resource that we own, which is different than places like Louisiana and Texas.
Right. A lot of people want to try to compare Alaska to, the tax rates that we have here to tax rates that you see in Texas or in Louisiana or some of the other states in the lower 48. It's not a valid comparison because Alaska is the only state in the country. Remember, we're one of the last states in the Union, number 49. We have one of the best constitutions in the Union. And one of the provisions that was put in by people like Vic Fisher was a provision that said, we own the subsurface rights. We own the oil and gas that's in the ground. That is not the way it is for the people of Texas. In Texas, you buy a piece of property and you happen to buy a property that's got a massive oil find on it, you own the oil. The oil company has to come negotiate with you for that land. That's very different than in Alaska, where all of us own it. We all own the oil and gas that's in the ground. Very, very important distinction.
Right, so if you're living with Jethro out in Nikiski, and I thought I was going to be making some outrageous point there. No, if you're living with somebody out in the boonies of Alaska and you're hunting for victuals and you shoot a hole in the ground and find oil, it doesn't belong to you.
Doesn't belong to you. Yeah.
It's not like the Beverly Hillbillies.
That's right.
Where they got it.
That's right.
That's why we're different, and that's why you can't compare us to North Dakota. You can't compare us to other states.
Yeah, that's right. So you know, people ask, okay, how do Alaska's tax rates compare to the tax rates that you see in the rest of the world? And this is going to be a little bit hard for you to read here in the room, but I'll just point out to you. So this is capturing Fisher. This is actually a slide that was presented during the ACES debate 3 years ago, and it's actually a slide by Chevron. And in the red is the tax rate in 2002, and in blue is the tax rate in 2006. And what you see is from 2002 to 2006, all of those countries were dramatically increasing their tax rate. And I'll just go through a few of them. If you look at the very bottom one, is a country that we've all heard a lot of, is Libya. Libya actually increased their tax rate to roughly 98%. Venezuela is one of those. In the blue, you'll see tax rate of 93%. China has a tax rate of 92%. Kazakhstan has a tax rate of 90%. Russia has a tax rate of 90%. The interesting thing about all those countries, all those countries that have tax rates from 90 to 98%, ConocoPhillips has invested in every single one of those countries. ConocoPhillips has plans to invest in, they're currently in Libya right now. They're going into China. They're investing in Kazakhstan. They're investing in Russia. Norway is another one. It's not on that list. Norway has a 78% tax rate. Go to the next slide. This is from the Parnell administration. This is the effective tax rates under what they currently are and what there are under the governor's bill. And again, it might be a little hard to see, but the current tax rate at $110 a barrel of oil, a little hard for me to see, is roughly 30%. That's the effective tax rate, okay?
Well, 30% seems a lot lower than 98, but I'm just a girl from
I'm no mathematician, but yeah.
We've got to run to a break. We're going to come back and talk about why this is being spun, that Alaska's closed for business. Have we all heard that? We're closed for business. They're being taxed. You know, the mom and pop oil companies are going to have to take the rockers off the back of their rigs. They're closing up. They're headed out. And you know, these are Parnell's numbers. We're going to look at these closer when we come back with Senator Bill Wielechowski on More Up North.